I now call on the registrar to read the last private business meeting. An ordinary public business meeting of the University Philosophical Society took place on the 5th of February 2015 with Professor Geoffrey Callan in the chair. Sorry, wrong page, and that is all. Outside of the debate last week, it was mainly SU elections all week, and reached its climax today with appeals for votes getting slowly more and more desperate. First of all came policy. That was early last week. There were proper debates on about the role of sponsorship in the SU, or about the role of all the different officerships. And then came slightly ad hominem attacks, different welfare candidates being accused of being homophobes. It became more personal. And then it kind of devolved ultimately today when someone came into my lecture and literally said the line, "You'd really do me a solid if you voted for me." And they said, "I know people who haven't voted yet, they probably don't really care about the election, but I would just really appreciate if you voted for me." There being no further business, the meeting adjourned. Are there any objections to signing these minutes as a true and accurate record of the last public business meeting? There being none, I shall duly sign. Okay, so welcome to the Phil this evening, where the motion up for debate is that this House believes that the artist has no responsibilities. The standing orders for the debate are that speeches are a maximum of 7 minutes in length. In terms of protected time and points of information, after the first minute of each speech, there'll be a bell that sounds like this. After this, members of the floor and speakers in the debate are free to offer points of information. These points of information are maximum 10 to 15 seconds in length, and if you refuse a point of information when you offer one, you just sit down. Before the last minute of the speech, there'll be another bell, after which there are no more points of information. And at the final minute, there'll be a double bell, which means that you're meant to wrap up your speech. So audience participation is encouraged, both in terms of offering points of information, and also when you agree with the point, you say "hear, hear," and if you disagree, you say "shame." Oratory returns. There's a reminder to rate the performance of all of our speakers on the oratory returns that are on your seats. Yeah, they are there. We appreciate your time filling in your oratory return sheets as it goes towards deciding who gets the gold medal of oratory at the end of the year. That's awarded to the speaker who gives the best speech of the whole session. And those are handed at the door to Owen and Matthew at the end of the debate. So, without further ado, I can call on the first proposition speaker, and that is Keith Murphy. He's a member of council of the 329 session and also a member of council of the 328 session of the Society.
2 seconds, guys, sorry. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen. To say of any artist, the artist in this case, has a responsibility is equal only in its foolishness as it is in its danger. It's an utterance that fails to understand what art, what it is, what we are, and just us as a collective. It's a bondage of the mind and it's a degradation of the soul, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I have a responsibility tonight to defend that soul, a duty to. I shall endeavour tonight to explain to all of you why a view that attributes responsibilities to artists destroys art utterly, robs us of real expression and the world of humanity, all that it is. I'll fail, ladies and gentlemen, but that's the point. Endeavour. We all fail to convey what we feel. It's an attempt and an eventual failure to reach a destination of pure expression. If you've ever tried, as I will now tonight, struggled or railed against your own useless faculties to convey what or how you are feeling, then you are an artist. Art, ladies and gentlemen, I can't define it. Nobody can. Nobody in this room is good enough to do it. But it's an accumulation of that which cannot be combined or tallied. It's the distillation of that which may never be pure, the sum aggregate of all that we are, but never fully what we are. Because all art is failure at endeavor. It's our pain, our beauty, our love, our lust, our joy, our rage, our salvation, damnation, all feeling, ladies and gentlemen. It's our raw, naked selves on show in all imperfection. And it is what makes us human. Our endeavor to express how we feel, how we truly feel, against the realization that we never really can. Give me 2 seconds. Because you never really know what I feel, and I'll never really know what you feel, and there's no way that we can really convey that. It's the rail against all creation and circumstance. It's pain and sublime in equal measure, ladies and gentlemen. It must be free from responsibility, because we're not strong enough to rail against responsibility as well. Andrew.
Do you think artists do art on purpose?
Yes, I believe we both do it on purpose and accidentally. When I meet somebody with a real convey of emotion, that's art. That's what it is, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe you think it's a painting or a sculpture, but at the end of the day, it's everything that we are. Now, it seems every time that I speak in this chamber, I must borrow or pilfer from the minds or mouths or words of others. There's an irony in my lack of originality in this, especially in this debate. Both Oscar Wilde and Stephen Fry, at some point, have addressed this society at least once in our history. Fry quoting Oscar, Oscar quoting himself in this case. Art is quite useless, they both told us. They said it's like a flower. It has no tangible purpose or gain to our lives, but at the same time, it is what we are. It is all that we are. We are human and we are all artists, as I've explained already. In that, in all senses, it's our most important trait. Art and being artists is what separates us from automatons, machines. Art is what makes us human. As I've said, if you've struggled to sum up how you feel, and you've lost yourself and pained against your own introspection, that's what an artist is. You cannot be human and not be an artist. Those two are mutually exclusive in this sense. Art is the expression, and all expression is art. Even if you don't like it, even if you hate it, especially if you hate it, rail against that hatred. Be filled with anger. Fight the monsters, but don't hide from them. Don't shut out what you don't like. Don't restrict yourselves because of your hate or upset. Because that's what this responsibility that side off will bring you. It's a restriction. You shackle that which is quite useless, but at the same time is the most important thing that we have. You shackle our very soul under what side opposition will bring you. You place borders on it. You build walls around it. You say what's right and what's wrong. You define art to what should be thought or felt instead of what actually is. As Oscar said, to define is to limit. I will take you shortly. To define is to limit. When you enforce responsibility upon me or anybody else, you rob me of the responsibility I have to myself, to try to tell you how I truly feel or what I really feel. To tell me that I have a responsibility to express how I feel in a particular way or not at all. True expression is next to impossible, ladies and gentlemen. You know it to be true. If you've ever spoken to anybody about anything you feel about, you know that even in their most sympathetic way, they can't feel what you feel. Go on.
Okay, do you think that art is inherently amoral? Like,
again, boom! Like, it's so crazy to put like art into like a box of morality or immorality or amoral or whatever. It's both immoral, immoral, moral, amoral, every kind of moral or amoral that they might bring you. It's all of those things because we are all of those things. We're fucked up and we're beautiful, but at the same time, we are all of those things. Remember that time you tried to tell someone how you felt, anyone how you felt. Remember, even with all their caring and empathy, how they never really understood. Remember how you still endeavored, ladies and gentlemen, and failed. Remember how much that hurt. Now imagine you have to do that, being told you have to express yourself in a responsible way. It's impossible. You can't really express how you feel already, but now you have to do it under a new set of rules and guidelines that they're going to bring you. Being told to do that is impossible. You can't express yourself really at all by yourself, and you certainly can't do it using somebody else's rules. Rules, responsibility, and restriction. Ladies and gentlemen, when you bring in responsibility, when you bring in rules, and when you bring in restrictions, when you bring in what these will try to bring in, you murder art and you murder our soul. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Keith. And now to open the case for opposition is Orla Delaney. She's a member of council of the 330th session.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen, Mommy, hi. I think, and I hope I'm not alone in thinking, that an art that speaks to the human soul, like Keith wants it to, is still possible without offending, degrading, and hurting other people. I don't want people to convey their innermost thoughts to me if those thoughts are going to tell me that I am somehow less or deserve to be hurt or killed. I'm happy to restrict expression of these thoughts in art, just as I would be happy to restrict them like in other forms of discourse. I'm going to talk about the social impact that art has, I'm going to talk about what the responsibilities are, and I'm going to talk about the duty and the power of the artist in this speech. So first, about the social impact. Like, debates about authorial intent and all that kind of stuff aside, it's not true to say that art has no impact in those who engage with it. And it's not true to say that the impact on the people who engage with art is less important than the artist getting across what they truly want to express. Like, the art we engage with influences our political, religious, and moral beliefs and values. Like, it's probably true to say that a lot of our value system is constructed by the culture that we consume. From like learning right and wrong from watching Barney to like more complex art that we engage with as adults in order to like challenge ourselves and interrogate what we believe in. Like, art plays no small role in shaping our individual morality and the morality of a society. Like, good art to any individual is generally like art that aligns with or else radically changes their worldview in a way they perceive as good. Like, for example, like Ayn Rand has made and encouraged many a libertarian like through her books. Like, this kind of influence manifests itself in a couple of ways I'm going to talk about. First of all, like, it manifests itself probably most worryingly through like a real and an overt harm to people. Like, when somebody has like morally repugnant views, like these views are reinforced through engagement with art that advocates these views. Like, we're talking like racist views, sexist views, like Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. No, thank you. Like, art has the power to incite these views into action. You have the power to make extremists more extreme. You have the power to make moderates turn to action through the art that you produce. Like, how this works is like when art shows people that there's a legitimate forum for the views like they have in their heads, they're more likely to believe that they're right. They're more likely to want to act on those views. Second of all, like more generally, like talking about the power of artists, the power of an artist to like take part in the discussion of an issue through their art. Like, in the same way as we shouldn't tolerate like overtly racist views from a politician, art can't be divorced from like the political discussion in which it's contextualized. Like, often art is considered like above debate and it's not interrogated in the same way as like an argument would be. But if the art like is political or if it is racist or something like problematic in that way, it should be treated as such and interrogated as such. Particularly when you're attentive to like the subtle cultural power that art is capable of having. Like, for example, like the effect of like songs like Blurred Lines, that suggest that like men know you want it, that like would encourage male entitlement to women's bodies, encourage men to believe that they do know that you want it. No, thank you. So like, what responsibilities does the artist have in particular? So first of all, I'd just like to say I'm not advocating like an entirely depoliticized form of art. I don't want to restrict the artist beyond like stopping them from saying things that hurt other people in a very real way. I'm also not trying to force any left-wing political perspective like on every artist. Like, one of the most valuable things about art is that it brings across a multiplicity of perspectives, which enables like readers or consumers of art to access another way of living or another way of thinking. Like, I believe that this can exist without needing to cause overt harm to other people. But there is also such a thing as a harmful rhetoric or a harmful depiction of this group, of like a group that can come across in art. Like, especially when this kind of stuff contributes to or reinforces cultural prejudices against that group, especially when it spurs people into action against that group, it does cause actual harm. Like, there is such a thing as a morally repugnant belief about how to treat people. For example, rape and genocide, two examples of things that are universally considered wrong. We wouldn't let anyone other than an artist promote these acts in their work. So like, why should we give those artists like a means of doing that? As well as that, I don't believe that anyone who's been through like any kind of traumatic experience should have to like relive that through insensitive artistic depictions of their experience. For example, telling them that their abuser had the right to do that to them, or that it was their fault that happened. I also do not believe that the burden should be on victims to avoid becoming exposed to things like that. Like, for example, today, like it's impossible to avoid being exposed to popular music that would be considered a form of art. Like, artists today are unavoidably operating within a context where they can't control the degree to which their music is consumed. Like, because of this, you have a responsibility not to make blurred lines that's going to like trigger a lot of people about their bad experience, because it offends people and it limits the freedoms of a group who are already like pretty vulnerable because of what they've gone through. Okay, so like, can the artist be held responsible for this? Does the artist actually like have this kind of duty? Like, it's probably like not true to say that just because you have an artistic impulse, you have absolutely no social duty. Like, I'm not comfortable with putting the art, like the act of creating art, like on a pedestal to such an extent that artists are made untouchable, like uncriticizable. No, thank you. Like that we can't like engage with what they do on the same level as we can with anyone else who contributes to public discourse. Like, artists are subject to the same influences, the same social responsibilities as the rest of us, only they're subject to them a little bit more, and they should be held more responsible for what they do with them because they have this specific platform through which they can broadcast their opinions. And the problem with this is that this platform is like considered sacred. It's fetishized to the extent that we're willing to absolve artists of all their moral duty. We're ready to like remove all those pesky blocks of like political correctness so that they can commune in the purest way with like that near spiritual impulse to make art. Like, I think this is probably pretty wrong. So like, because the artist's work has a real impact, because it has the power to actually realistically hurt many people, they probably have a duty not to do that. And I would rather that they fulfill this duty than express their true artistic impulse. I'm proud to oppose.
Thanks very much, Orla. And up next on the proposition side is Lily McKillop. Lily is an honorary member of the 330th session, the honorary steward of the 329th session, and a member of council of the 328th session.
So today I'll be speaking about a few different things, mainly sort of like freedom of art and of expression, how art sort of exists within its own sort of paradigm, I guess, and how this can be damaging to art in general. But before I move on, just a few little things from what Orla said. The idea that like art, you know, it can be triggering or it can make extremists more extreme. That is kind of probably true in a lot of ways, but like, where do you draw the line between that and full-on censorship of art that like in many other ways can be very fulfilling? As in, like, there may be certain like pieces of literature or like works of fine art that might be triggering for some people, but at which point do you draw the line when everyone's interpretation of art is so subjective and so interpretive to themselves? If you're to burden like one artist with responsibility, you're to burden all artists with responsibility. And I think that's at the point in which people who want to create art, people who want to express themselves, start to question themselves and start to feel as though they can't be free in their creativity. And that's where I see a problem is. But basically, who gets to say what is responsible and what's irresponsible in art? We see like art has been around pretty much since humans have been around. You could say that like a work of Victorian fiction, if it were published today, would be absolutely damning, and that we'd probably burn it. Publishers wouldn't want to be published or whatever because it's sexist and because it's outwardly racist. And like Enid Blyton books are extremely racist, but hey, they're still classics and they're still flying off the shelves, and children are read to them before bedtime. But you have to look at the context in which art has progressed, in which it has evolved. You have to understand that there is a social context to everything, and to each piece of art, whether it be like a painting or a photograph or a piece of literature or a film. And you have to understand that that's the beauty of art, that it kind of transcends time, that it transcends political opinions, that it transcends social context. And that's one of its beauties, that you can appreciate a work of art that was created 900 years ago today as much as it was at that time. Is something amazing about it, even if you don't agree that this like glorified piece of Jesus is good because you think that the Catholic Church is bad, but you can still appreciate it in its aesthetics form. I think that responsibility is too vague a term to afford any piece of art or to any artist. We think that art is something that is, especially like in a globalized world that we have, that like everyone across the globe gets to be involved with. We think that like, what are the implications if we as a society accept that yes, the artist has a responsibility? Like, what does that actually mean? We're society like widely to say that, yeah, okay, artists do have responsibility. What would that mean? Would it mean censorship? Like, who gets to decide what's responsible? Like, would we have the Catholic Church, would we have the Irish government looking over publishers and deciding what gets to go to print or not? Or looking over photographers and deciding, you know, what gets to be shown in an art gallery because they see that it's like obscene, or they see that it's immoral, or they see that it's irresponsible to Irish people. And that's just the context in which we're in, but you could pretty much apply that to any kind. Like, what happens in the Middle East where you have like a woman who makes a piece of art that like her government deem as to look sort of liberating for her, and they want to curb on it. Like, that is the reality of art. Like, you can talk about a lot of works of fiction that are triggering for people, and like, that is true, and I wouldn't want to say to anyone, oh, you should avoid those pieces of art or whatever. But at the same time, art also liberates an incredible amount of people. We've seen art throughout time has been the only medium in which people can actually like express themselves. People with depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder, that the only way in which they can contact the outside world is through their means of art. That the only way in which like the likes of Emily Dickinson, who was a hermit, got to talk about like her depression or whatever. And we think that that's incredible, and that's why you shouldn't afford certain kinds of responsibility. Because when art evolves as this responsibility and has this morality, because presumably we're talking about ethics here, and we're talking about morality. So what's moral now won't be moral in 50 years. What's moral now wasn't 100 years ago. I think that it's too arbitrary a line to draw. So that if society were to accept, like, think that this was acceptable and afford responsibility to artists or to art as a whole, that it would have wider implications for art and how people like manifest their creativity. Then sort of like how this limits art as well. I think that, like, again, as I said, if we were to accept that artists do have responsibility, that this would stop people from expressing themselves. That if people were too afraid that what they might do might harm someone emotionally, or that it might have a triggering effect with someone, that you may limit people's creativity. And that's when you get less art. We see that art does exist in this amazing aesthetic that it does, that it kind of can transcend politics, that it can transcend all sorts of beliefs. And that I, as a person here in the West, can appreciate a painting or a line of a poem as much as someone in China or Alaska or like South America or whatever it can. I mean, that's one of the beauties of it. And we say that like when you like afford too much weight to art and to the artist, that's when you stop getting creativity, and you start getting people who are really afraid to make worthwhile pieces of art or pieces of literature or pieces of film. Because as we've seen, like, you know, society dictates what is seen as immoral or what's seen as responsible. See, like, you have works like films that are like extremely sexually explicit that a lot of countries don't want you to see, a lot of governments don't want you to see. But we say that, then other people say that's art and that's freedom of expression. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people will see that as irresponsible. Like, we think morality is too much of a grey area, that it's too vague a term to afford something. Where are we now? So this sort of comes back to what Orla was saying, but how I think there's more of a responsibility of the receiver of art and the person who engages with art than there is on the artist. So this idea that it can turn extreme people even more extremist, that it can sway people to extreme sides. I think that that's not necessarily the responsibility of the artist, but the person who receives that art, the person who engages within that art. I think that when you read a piece of literature or when you watch a film and how it changes your view and your outlook on life and on society, that's not because of that piece of art. That comes from your social context. It comes from the people who have raised you. It comes from the government that you happen to have been born under. We think that that's more important and that's more embedded in you and how you interpret art than the artist is. We say that if you were to make an abhorrent piece of literature that one person can read, yeah, okay, you may every now and again get someone who's swayed to the wrong side or whatever. But we think that's probably more likely to happen if that person already has those opinions anyway, or who's grown up with people or with a family who already have those views and thinks of things. That if you depict something that's particularly violent or that's about genocide or rape, that it inspires people. But we think that that's probably in a very minute amount of cases. We think that those kind of people who are swayed in that sense already have those kind of views and already come from a background and from a society that it seems unacceptable. So I suppose for the sake of expression and how it's dangerous to overly politicize and limit art, that please.
Thank you very much, Lily. And just before we go on, after the final speech in this debate, will be time for maybe 2 or 4 floor speeches. So if anyone is interested in giving about a 4-minute floor speech on either side of this motion, write your name and the side you want to speak on a sheet of paper and hand it up here to the table. So the next speaker is on side opposition, and it's Hannah Beresford, and she's the current vice president of the society.
I sincerely hope that there isn't actually anyone at the other end of that live stream.
My mom's watching it. My mom.
Oh, hi guys. I'm not freaked out by them watching me, they're okay. So we've heard an awful lot of kind of fluffy stuff on side proposition about how art has an incredible power to move us, that it transcends all other values that we can place in it, which must be upsetting for any economists in the room, because all things have some sort of vague utility. And the idea that ultimately it is so important in the way that it kind of gives us a glimpse into the mystery of humanity that we cannot access in any other form. And I'm kind of sitting there and I'm just thinking, so, because at the end of the day, if you, as somebody who has been sexually abused as a child, has to sit through a movie that causes you to relive all of that pain of that immediate moment and all of that trauma, and then all of the trauma that happens for the rest of your life, and all of the ways that shapes how you interact with the world around you, and you have to sit there and you have to relive that, and you have to have that reinforced, and you have to change your own perceptions of yourself. No thanks, Lily, because I imagine you should probably not go to see that movie, but frankly that's bullshit, because your friends are going to see it and they're going to talk about it. I don't really care much if it gives us the glimpse at the wonder of humanity, because I'm not sure that that gives us any particular, no thanks Claire, value, in the way that how that can affect someone does. I'm going to be talking to you, no thanks, about 2 main things. First of all, I'm going to be talking to you about responsibilities, and secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the merits of art versus the suffering of victims. Before that though, I've got a couple of pieces of rebuttal from what we've heard from Keith and Lily. Okay, so first of all, we heard a lot about how art transcends any of our various beliefs, any of our social codes, that it is something so much more important. And we are here, and that's basically the response we got to the idea that you shouldn't have to live in a society that tells you certain things about how you should experience your trauma, that you shouldn't live in a society that tells you certain things about what it is to live as a black person in that society or someone with disabilities. because like the art that we consume, the art that we see around us, consistently like reinforces so many of these ideas and these beliefs, and consistently reinforces them in an incredibly like negative way. Like point me to any like TV show or movie or book that like gives you like a non like offensive or irritating version of what it is like to live as a person with Down syndrome in our society, and I'll go, my God, it's amazing, I haven't heard about this. Oh yes, it's because it doesn't sell particularly well. And like the issue with side proposition, no thanks, is that they're talking an awful lot about the power of art to subvert like our current morality and to like bring us further along and be progressive. And like that's all well and good, but that's ignoring what this debate is actually about, which is art that like does genuinely hurt people. That's art that actually is offensive. Because that's the other thing that side proposition keep telling us. They tell us that like there is no absolute morality, we have no idea really what right and wrong is, which is funny because there are things that we accept from artists that would never be acceptable if it was a lecturer saying to you in a lecture theatre, no thanks Aisling, that would never be acceptable if it was me talking to you in a conversation room after this debate. We have like a certain set of ideas of like what's about like being a reasonable person in our society in terms of what you can say directly to someone. But somehow, like you pull out your paintbrush or you write a poem, no thank you, and you're not being held to this particular standard, no thank you, because of the fact that you put on this platform that Orla has spoken to. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, which we'll be talking to you a little bit more about in a bit. We also heard stuff like the burden on the person receiving this art, like not to consume things. We think first of all, yes, like there's no way that if you were like leaning towards being an extremist in some particular form, we think that like that's more their fault, no thank you, than the art that they're consuming. We do think, however, that being an artist, like and having that power to influence people, does give you this like massive degree of ability to shape how people feel. No thank you. Look at how important and influential all types of propaganda has been to like politicians like, since the beginning of time. Look at the fact, no thank you, that you can create pictures to just like give people the idea of like how it is things exist in the real world and reinforces all of those ideas. And look at that power and tell me that simply because this person is creative or tapping into some idea of our humanity, that they have less responsibility, no thank you, than a politician would have in that particular circumstance. Or like a baker, or like any other person who lives in our society, and tell me what exactly it is that the artist contributes that's so fundamentally different from all the other ways that we access no thank you and express what it is to be human. Because ultimately I'm not so sure that like being able to paint a picture tells me more about my humanity than being somebody who's able to look into a microscope and be, oh yeah, that's Streptococcus like bacillus or whatever. No thanks. Because we think that all of the things that we do, every single action, I've moved far from rebuttal into my speech at this point in case you haven't flagged that, every single thing that any person does is expressing their humanity and accessing the wonder of what it means to be human. We think that art is something different in that it's like actively creating something, no thank you, that engages differently. And yeah, I'm sure all the cheesemakers that my dads are mates with would be quite pissed off if I said they're not artists. But in the common, like how we think of an artist is, that's not what they are. They don't have the ability to affect society and to affect how we feel and how like and to like change our relationship with the things we see around us, like in the way that artists have. No thanks, guys. Okay, I'm getting passionate here. You have to go on my flow. We think that like we have this bizarre notion that art does something that brings us further, and I'm not so sure that side proposition have explained to me enough why it is that like that is so like that is more valuable than anything else, and also why it's more valuable than the person sitting in the cinema trying not to cry because what they're watching is causing them to relive the worst moments of their lives. And I'm going to take you. Okay, so I think that like also there's a difference between like reducing this to like never offending anyone ever, and also like being mindful of the fact that you live in a society and the things that you do and what you say like affect people. I think there is a value sometimes to the artist offending, but I also think that sometimes the artist has a responsibility not to do that. Sometimes the artist does have a responsibility not to rock the boat because it doesn't gain anything and all it does is hurt people in a way that just isn't valuable for humanity, whatever your vague notions of the wonder of humanity is. We think the fact that there is loads of art that we no longer consider acceptable is actually a really like good like motion to this. Look to like the current exhibition that's on in like Montreal on Orientalism that's caused like massive backlash because of the way they present these like paintings, which is showing that we haven't learned anything from the last like 1,000 years of being racist, that reinforces like
all of the horrible racist tropes that like Orientalism as an art form promoted, and reinforced all of the ideas that we as white Westerners like had about people who just happen to live outside of Europe. We think that like at that time that artist probably shouldn't have done that. We think now we have an even greater responsibility not to continue to promote those views through that art, to continue to like recognize that just because it's kind of pretty doesn't necessarily mean that it is good or that is valuable. Art is important because it changes how we interact with the world, and because of that, the artist absolutely has a responsibility, as any other human being who's less good at drawing has. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And up next for the proposition is Aisling Crowell, who is a member of council of the 330th Session.
Everyone's dressed so well tonight, I appreciate it. Hey guys. So just to kind of talk about like two main things, like the glorification of an individual doesn't like necessarily occur just because you enjoy their art, and then like the social cost of if we start holding artists responsible. But first, like just a couple of pieces of rebuttal. So like Hannah, like if we avoid and like ban and hold responsible every single piece of art because it may cause offense to some individual at some stage ever, like society loses out and there is no discourse and debate and there is no like chance of us having that thing. Even if the artist does intend to be offensive, like we don't really mind this because we think that then like society can decide for themselves what they do find moral, what they do find important, instead of like just banning it completely and saying like, oh, we're just not going to have this discussion anyway. Like we look at the idea of what Orla brought up, which is like blurred lines. Like without that song, the rape culture debate would not have happened. It wouldn't have existed in the sphere that we wanted to exist. Because right now, it's very nice for me to be sitting in this chamber and being like, oh well, I think like having a discussion about like rape culture and how this is bad and discussing about the patriarchy. But the difference was with this release of blurred lines, I saw articles on BuzzFeed, I saw articles on Tumblr. Like we see it going down along the lines that we actually wanted to go down, instead of in the like privileged upper zones where we feel the debate already happened, so we don't really care. And if we held that artist responsible, that would have gone. That wouldn't have gone mainstream in any way. No, not. So like first point, like the glorification of an individual, like doesn't necessarily occur just because you enjoy their art. Like we realize that art is offensive, but like the artist can still be a good person, and the artist can't be held responsible for this. Like the difference is that this art, like the great thing about art is that they're not imposing a view, they're expressing a view. And like the major belief and like the thing that we all do here, which is sharing beliefs that we hold, is that we don't impose them. And like imposing leaves no room for discourse, it leaves no room for debate or interpretation, all of which art is, all of which it does. And what like it very much embodies now. So you think like immoral acts of the artist and like what we hold them responsible for per se are like separate events to what their art is individually. Oh.
Okay. Okay, so the very fact that we had a massive social backlash against Robin Thicke, does that not show us that he does actually have responsibilities, not to say offensive things?
Yes, we agree that his like song was incredibly offensive, and we think that was a great thing. And had we not held him responsible, then we wouldn't have found out what had happened. So we think that like the point is that he wasn't responsible for exactly what happened. We think like without him doing that, we wouldn't have had that discourse, we wouldn't have had that discussion. And we think like without an artist being offensive and not having limitations, which proposition wants to put on them, that discourse just completely appears. We think that artists are creative people. We think that artists should be allowed to express whatever the hell they want, and it should be up to society to decide. If we're placing that on the artist rather than society to decide, so society to say, oh no, we don't think this is right, we're going to ban it, instead of saying like, oh no, allowing the society, no, Hannah, like to do that would have been like a hugely detrimental thing. We just wouldn't have had that discussion. So we think that like it's all very well and good for opposition to come up here and run the like really nice line of like, oh well, we find the art offensive, like that's really, really bad. Like no, the point is that the art, it can be offensive and the artist can be offensive, and we allow that and we think that's great, and then we can decide from there afterwards, rather than like, it's very nice for you to stand up here and say like, oh, this will be detrimental, this will follow on from this. Like no, we don't care what the follow on is. You're trying to stop it at the very beginning, at its conception, rather than following through to the very end and allowing for that discourse. So So we think that like art is universal and that's what makes it great. Like we never know exactly what the author intended. And we think that like this is what makes art so accessible and popular and allows people to interact with the art rather than just the artist, rather than holding the artist responsible. They can separate themselves from that and see what the art for what it truly is, whether it be good or bad. So we think that like, no. But like we can hold the art for being offensive, but the artist is distinct and different to this and shouldn't be held responsible. Because like for an idea, like an example, a lot of famous painters have suffered with depression, which is like a mental stigma in our society. Like I hate to break it to you, it just is. Or like if they've made mistakes in the past that we feel that we should hold them responsible for now, if they were in prison, if they made like immoral mistakes that we feel now like we should hold them to because that's what makes them responsible and that's what like the definition of responsible is, that like we then cannot enjoy their art to the level that we should. We then can't like, their art is no longer a reflection of like what they want it to be. It's a reflection of them. It's a reflection of the artist because we're holding the artist responsible for their art. And we think that like if forced into their like to reflect their personality and forced to be responsible for their personality, like their art would no longer like we would experience their art differently. Like this completely like negates society from interacting with art pieces alone because we're trying to hold people responsible for their pieces, which just isn't fair because then they lose their idea of expressionism. We lose that idea of like of debate between the two. So like the social cost of like what happens if this happens, no. So like we think that art shaped history by going against the grain and going against the idea of what like is right or wrong. And if we had held these artists responsible, we would have lost this. Like we point to the idea of like Jesus of the People by Jeanette McKenzie, in which she depicted Jesus as a black lesbian woman. Like we see this as a huge massive backlash from the Vatican. It was hugely like progressive for the civil rights movement. It was hugely progressive for the LGBT movement, who pointed to this and said, prove to us that Jesus wasn't a black lesbian. And I mean, this is the point. Like I know you all laugh, but the point is that she managed to make that piece and put it forward and present herself. And if she'd been held responsible, that piece would have been taken down. That piece would have been removed, and we would have lost that discourse, and we would have lost that movement. Like we think that like art, and all types of people are artists. Like we look at like Heartbreak Box by Nirvana. Like I'm really sorry that art can't always be pretty pictures of like beautiful women, but it just isn't, and that's what things like art is meant to challenge. And even if it is offensive, we think that's beneficial because like if we hold those people responsible, we lose these views. We lose that communication, good or bad. Like to hold the responsible art, like the artist responsible for the art, it makes it harder to appreciate the message that they're trying to convey, good or bad. It makes it harder as a society to move forward and decide for ourselves if the act is good or bad, if we evaluate like the morality of the message. Because it's really, really difficult for us if we're holding the artist responsible from day one, instead of interpreting for the art, like we're interpreting the artist. And there's no point in like criminalizing an individual when we want to actually look at the message that the art is producing. We want to actually look at the idea of why that makes us feel offended and why that is wrong. Because there's no point in us like villainizing a person. That's a get out clause. That's not letting us interact with that. That's not letting us actually look at the crux of the argument. It's just a really nice get out clause of like, oh, well, that artist is just racist. Oh, that artist is just offensive for being offensive. Like, we don't care about that. What we want is the actual interaction with the art piece, the actual interaction between society, and that is why we're so happy to propose.
Thanks very much. Just to confirm the floor speeches that will happen after the following speech. On proposition will be Jamie Donnelly and Kieran O'Brien, and on opposition will be Stefan Mabruk and Claire Nicali. And the final speaker out of the 6 speakers on benches will be Teresa Basselfahi, who is member of council of the 330th session.
So guys, I had to think a lot about this debate because if everyone knows me, I love art and I love art all the time. But basically, I think a lot about it and I thought so much, and basically what I came to the conclusion is that artists do have responsibilities, and ultimately their responsibilities is to themselves. And I questioned that, and I thought maybe that's the other side, maybe I'm like in the middle, what do I think? But ultimately, I thought that, I questioned myself, would I participate in an art form or an art piece that will ultimately cause harm to someone else? So I don't know if you know that, I can't remember her name, crazy artist who does like installation pieces. But one time she had one in New York, sat down and had a gun in front, and I asked someone to hold a gun at her
So would you participate in an art form that you know is going to intentionally cause harm to someone? And that's the question, I think. Because I wouldn't, and I don't know what the sides would say. But basically, our thing is not censoring. No one's censoring anything. We're talking about discussion. We're talking about like the responsibility on a moral scale. Like I wouldn't like create an art form that I would cause harm to someone, and that's like I think an ultimate thing. Because the responsibility is to the artists themselves. And creating a work of art, no matter what, you're creating a work of art individually for yourself, but no matter what, it's going to interact with society in any way. And like even if you do a doodle or whatever, if someone's going to look at it, someone's going to be affected by it. Simple things like that, like people don't realize that artists have so much power in the world that they've always been like placed below. But like realistically, like as Hannah said, like propaganda has influenced like way society views things or views people. And I think that's like art is everywhere. No, thank you. Art is everywhere, and ultimately, like people believe that like it doesn't affect people or like it will affect people and highlights problems. But like saying that, it's like, would you participate in harming someone that like just for this form of art and form of like saying
Teresa,
stuff? Yeah.
I don't really think that's what people say. Like when Hannah says things like, oh, it can be triggering, but at the same time, that can also be extremely cathartic when you've gone through like a traumatic experience and you see a piece of art and you relate to that piece of art rather than it just being traumatic.
Yeah, no, I know, I agree. It can be cathartic. Like people, like artists have a responsibility in a way to like express their feelings. I'm not saying in any way, like I'm an artist myself. I like express my feelings and hope people like understand like the pain I'm going through or any artist going through, like with depression or with anything else, that people can relate to it. But I'm not going to create an art form that I know like race is going to be discriminated, sex is going to be discriminated, or anything like that, because that is harming someone. And I think like if you're going to have a gallery and you're going to put a work of art, like that's just wrong, I think, because you're creating a discourse and a discussion around it and like an acceptance around it. Because you have to sometimes like not accept certain things because they're just wrong. Because like Manet, like I do this because I do painting, but like Manet created basically a painting of Olympia, and it was like of a prostitute and a female nude. She did the exact same nude as a previous painting before, but just because the previous painting was a mythological subject, it was accepted. But now he created work that caused a stir because it went against society and caused uproar. But this was a positive thing because it didn't cause harm. It caused a discussion, an influence, a way of doing it that wasn't harming individuals. It caused society to look at itself, view itself in a certain way, and question it, and not being harmed. But we're like, our side is not saying about restrictions. It's not saying any limits. It's just everything. Like you have responsibilities for like a person like you're creating the art for. So like if you're creating like, let's say that new sculpture that's in Trinity, like you have a certain responsibility to create an art form that people want, that people are accepted. Like if you were like asked to curate a gallery or to like create an art form like for Dublin City Centre or whatever, like you have a responsibility in certain ways. Like I'm thinking about very like artistically. No, thank you. But like what else I say? Like rebuttal on some sides. The society like doesn't dictate like how you view things or how you express things. This is what Lily was saying. It's how you personally view things. Society like wouldn't influence that. It's if you connect with a piece of art, it's how you view it and how your emotions connect with it. It doesn't limit it by society. What was I say? Keith was saying responsibility to your own pure expression, and that's true. You have responsibility to yourself as an artist. But participating in stuff that will limit society in certain ways, like will not help and like cause harm to individuals. Like Banksy, like everyone knows Banksy, and everyone thinks he has no responsibility to anyone. He has responsibility himself, which creates art forms that are plastered around New York City and cause discourse, and society interact with them and they create discourse around that. So if he had no responsibilities and created like hurtful works of art, like people could take up on them and cause harm around this. But because he creates positive works of art, this helps influence it. Sorry. Oh yeah, like basically like responsibilities have been like for artists have been brought through like centuries, basically because of like the patrons that have given art forms to work upon. Because like if artists had no responsibilities, like the arts wouldn't have come today, I think, because they have responsibility for the people who are ultimately paying for the art in like a simple matter. Like that's how it is. Because like galleries are sometimes limited because if their patrons are not giving funding because of certain art forms, then they won't. Like, because I definitely ultimately wouldn't like own a gallery and then allow someone who has racist or sexist or homophobic art in my gallery, and that's fair to limit because it's causing harm to someone else.
I think that the side op has like limited the debate, saying it's just censorship, and I don't think there's anything like censorship. Just having a knowledge of like what the world around you is, and just creating a discourse in a positive way, because it's just like I just can't see creating a work of art that hurtfully harms someone is really a work of art. It's not creating a positive emotion. It's creating a limited emotion. It's causing harm to someone. I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't want that on my hands. I don't know what you guys think. But basically, art is eternal. It will never die. It will never end. And would you like to have created something that has like such a powerful influence in a positive way or a negative way? And that's like the ultimate question, I think. And basically, I'd like to leave you on that note on moralizing art.
Thanks very much, Teresa. And now to open up the 4-minute floor speeches is Jamie Donnelly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen. So I'd like to bring a couple of ideas from the debate these years so far. The first idea is one, and that isn't a surprise that has come up, because I actually think it lies more so in the domain of medicine and psychiatry than it does in media. And that's the notion that media can be triggering. And I think what's happened here is that the opposition have conflated social disgust with a symptom of PTSD. And what I mean by this is that medical professionals find it very difficult to agree on what will trigger somebody. Oftentimes it's idiosyncratic to individuals. So within that, a soldier who's fought in a war might not be triggered by watching Saving Private Ryan, but they might well be triggered if they hear the pipe of a car exhaust go off in the distance. Similarly, a woman might not get triggered when they read a book that happens to involve a rape scene in it, but they might well if they happen to smell perfume that reminds them of the night in question. So if indeed this is not about sheer physiological psychic shock and more about social disgust, then it's not really clear how the objections the opposition have brought are really any different from the objections we bring to political views that we personally disagree with. So that's the first idea. The second idea I want to take issue with is that of responsibility, because if it doesn't lie with the artist, then who does it lie with? Or if it does lie with the artist, then are we absolving individuals who consume art and media in terms of their response? Because the opposition want to base our responsibilities on offence. And I have a problem with this on one main level. That's that offence is something which is inherently unobservable, unfalsifiable, and unverifiable. It's something which is private, it's idiosyncratic to individuals, and they represent social sentiments that you personally have formed, as opposed to something more broad. And the reason this is important is because if you want to talk about standards which we can apply in the public arena of expression, it has to be a standard which is acceptable by reasonable people. It has to be a public standard on which there can be some consensus relative to an overlapping doctrine of consensus of a good. And the problem with making offence that unique criterion is that you essentially privilege private morality over public morality. And if you want to see the effects of this, look back to 50 years ago when homosexuality is considered offensive. Look back to the days when any kind of artwork that challenged Catholic Church doctrines ended up being challenged on the basis it was socially subversive. So if you want to use social offence as being a metric for determining whether we like art or not, then what you're ultimately doing is you're basing it on a criterion which is as likely to backfire in your face than it is to be positive for it. And that's this idea that art is able to make people more racist. I would genuinely contest whether that's empirically true, for the simple reason that people who aren't racists tend to find racist art very uncompelling. For example, see anybody who doesn't read the Daily Mail. But if you really want to talk about art that genuinely makes you feel enraged, then what you have to do is go out and challenge that art. Go out and show them why they're wrong. The kind of art that Hannah and Orla want to talk about, and I agree it may well be objectionable, is generally not difficult to deconstruct in the first place. When Dani Alves had bananas thrown on him during La Liga game, he could have simply walked off the pitch in disgust. But what he did was he picked up a banana and ate it. And what that did is that anybody who's watching on TV saw that the racists who were trying to taunt him looked like complete idiots because he went and subverted the original meaning of what they said in the first place. So if you really want to be accepted as democratic equals in society, you mustn't hide away from art that offends you. You must, if anything, you must be willing to challenge it because that's ultimately the way we ultimately have our ideas vindicated in the public sphere. Thank you.
Thank you. And now on opposition is Stefan Lebrun.
I'll tell you about it later. Ladies and gentlemen of the University Philosophical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I agree, and I think most people here would agree, that art has a great capacity to damage and has a great capacity to punch down, especially when it's wielded by those that occupy positions of social or political dominance. In the same way that dominant political groups continuously punch down and suppress those that are less fortunate than them. So we think that art can be used as a tool for this. Because we live in a world where significant power asymmetries exist between different social groups. Look at Congress in the US, which is largely white, male, old. You've heard it all before, and there exist oppressed groups that are disproportionately harmed by policies put in by those people. So I would ask this chamber, currently, in the status quo, when we presumably don't have all these notions of moral responsibility attached to it, currently, who gets to decide what constitutes legitimate art, what constitutes art that's that is within the public morality that the props seem to stand behind? And we find that being in a position of power, be it artistic or political, allows those politically dominant social groups to suppress those, and they use that power to oppress those beneath them. Because just like using those mechanisms in politics, accessing societal controls through art depends on things like capital, it depends on things like labor, it depends on things like land, things that these groups simply don't have. Look at how much capital you have to put in to spread, to make something popular in a conventional sense. We think that just in the same way that politics operates in this way, there exist significant barriers to these groups. So we think they exist in art. And yes, we agree that in some cases, oppressed groups within oppressed groups can use art as a mechanism. Can use art as a mechanism to break out of that oppression. But we think that if you look at the big picture, in the vast majority of cases, it is somebody in a position of power punching down against somebody with less power, simply because those power asymmetries exist. So we think that the only way to empower these press groups is by opening alternative channels for their art to proliferate and for good art to proliferate. And we think that this alternative channel is rooted in the sense of moral responsibility. It's at the same time is good and espouse the principles that we believe in, but it's also compatible with the general principles of liberalism that underpin Western states. Yeah, go ahead.
How are these minorities meant to express their views if the views you're finding them responsible for are offensive?
Well, that's what I'm saying. No, the status quo is that powerful groups within these states punch down and suppress these points of view. What we think is that by attaching a sense of moral responsibility, what kind of art should be considered legitimate, that in turn empowers those groups. So this alternative channel, right, it is rooted in a sense of moral responsibility. So the idea that you should be allowed in principle to publish Islamophobic cartoons, but maybe you probably shouldn't. You should legally be allowed to do it, but perhaps it shouldn't be a good thing to do. And we think that only by fostering this sense of moral responsibility and that some art is good and some art isn't, that's the only way to undermine traditional strongholds of political power that are used to oppress these minority groups. We're very happy to oppose.
Thanks very much, Stefan. And to close up the case for the proposition side is Darren O'Brien. So you're afforded maiden's rights. So if you accept the maiden's rights, no one can offer you a point of information, and the room will be very mute. And if you waive the Mason's rights, you're eligible to accept points of information from the floor, and you'll be greeted with raptors round the walls. So do you accept them or waive them?
I just wrote my speech on my ballot paper. Good to go. Okay, so like hopefully in my speech, what's gonna happen is that like I don't actually want to disagree with a lot of what the opposition is saying, and I also want to shed more light on what's already been brought up by side proposition that I feel like has been diluted as the debate has gone through its course, right? So basically, the one question that I want to put to the floor is what does it actually mean to be an artist, right? Because we've heard so much discourse on like selling of art and like shoving art down other people's throats and like going to the cinema and being upset because you've been offended by what's on the big screen. I think if we just ask this question of what it actually means to be an artist, we can get to the bottom of a lot of what we're all disagreeing about, right? So when I think of what it means to be an artist, to put it in a Venn diagram, as I am a studier of math. Okay, so basically what I think being an artist is, as what Keith brought up, and I think what Keith brought up has been diluted too much as the debate's gone on, is that like, basically what being an artist is just trying to find out what stuff means and like trying to kind of get to the bottom of problems that you have, just trying to like express yourself. And it doesn't even have to express yourself in a way that other people can see it. What I think that like a paradigm of art is say when you get like just having like an existentially problematic day, and you just feel like life is just so painful for no particular reason, and that life is really confusing and mysterious, and you just feel like it's all a bit difficult, so you go to your room and for some reason you write a poem or you write a song. Not that anyone's going to read your poem or like listen to your song, but it's just for you, like it's just to express yourself, try and get to the bottom of stuff, given that life is just so weird and confusing. And I think that's what an artist is. Like an artist isn't someone who's trying to push something down your throat. An artist isn't someone like on its own, like the pure form of art is literally just someone who's like on their own, privately, just sorting stuff out in their head, right? Maybe writing it down on a piece of paper. So that's why we hear from like speakers like Hannah on the opposition, and they say like when you go to the cinema and you see an offensive movie that's problematic. What I say is that like if you look at my Venn diagram and say like, oh, like they're artists, but they're also like profit makers. They're artists, they're also like publishers, they're artists, they're also trying to take your money off you, they're artists. They're also trying to get you to read something. They're also trying to get you to listen to something. They're trying to shove it down your throat. Let's make people who try to shove stuff down your throat. Let's make people who try to like make money off you. Let's make them responsible, right? Like they're the ones who are causing the problem. I think this debate comes down to making that distinction. It's the people who try to affect other people who need to have responsibilities. But if I'm feeling especially sad or especially confused, I feel like I should have a place that I can go and rip out like a page from my notebook and just don't think about the rest of the world and just think about me and do whatever I want in that 1 hour where I just sit down and want to make a piece of art, like paint a picture that represents what I think without having these responsibilities. Because ladies and gentlemen, like I don't think it's not important for humans to have a space where they can just forget about everything else. Like I don't think it's not, I think it is important that humans have a kind of a free space. And I mean actually free, like not free where there's like a government giving you regulations, but it's okay because those regulations are loose. No, we say like no regulations. We think there's like a place where humans can, you know, explore and think through their own thoughts without literally thinking of anything else, like without having any shackles, like without any shackles at all. That's what an artist is. An artist is literally someone who is trying to like discover. An artist is someone who's trying to be expressive. So we think that on side opposition, I would agree with a lot of what you're saying, that it's not okay to like be grossly offensive. It's not okay to be hurtful. It's not okay to like kill people. But those people are art. Those people are artists and something more. They're not pure artists. Artists on their own is like me sitting in my room just like working stuff out because I'm so confused as like an adolescent. You guys are talking about like artists plus something. Attack the plus somethings, not the art itself. Artists and like humanity. Okay, whatever. Thank you to propose.
Thanks very much, Kieran, for an excellent maiden speech. And now to close the debate as a whole is Bernie Callan.
Hey guys, so this is nice. I don't normally get to do this because I set the motions and I think that they're all perfectly balanced. So I guess that I do think of the artist as having a responsibility. I guess maybe that's a looser responsibility than other people conceive it as. Like I, for example, wouldn't agree with like state censorship or anything like that, like Darren just said. But I think for me, what it is, it's about the artist acknowledging the power of like what they are doing. And it's about them taking responsibility for the power of what they're doing. And that's a nuanced thing, right? So I think that the artist is in like a unique place in society to do that because they're not a politician and they're not a journalist and they're not these other people who like contribute to discourse in a way of saying, this is what I think is right, this is what I think you should do. A lot of the time they exist in this kind of like nuanced space where what they're saying is just like, think about this, like see what this means or more importantly, what it doesn't mean, like what this just says to you on a more intuitive level. I think that they are a lot of the time are the only people who can do that. And I think, for example, a good example of this, or like of an artist taking responsibility, is me and Lucy Googled the quote just there. But it's like when Yeats, after his play Kathleen Houlihan, which like roused people massively, said, like, did that play of mine like send out certain men the English shot? Like, I think it would have been irresponsible of him to be like, I don't really care that I wrote a play and certain people went out and got killed because of that play. Like, I think that would have been an irresponsible thing to not acknowledge the power of what your words did to other people, right? So I think that it is about an artist acknowledging what their work does and not just saying, oh, it's just art. Like I wasn't responsible for the things that it created or the things that like came out of it. But there's your work. No, thank you. And again, okay, so that's this like existing kind of in this nuanced space or like things not being right or wrong. I think there's like quite a lot of examples of this. So I think, for example, if you take like Lolita as an example, like I think it would have been irresponsible of like Nabokov to like convey like Humbert in Lolita as like this person who seduced a child and was totally right in doing so, right? So I think that would have been an irresponsible thing to do. But I think that actually was incredibly valuable that he created this character that is half charming and half horrifying. Like I think that contributed to the type of discourse that surrounds that surrounds, for example, child seduction more than any psychoanalytic study ever did. Because that is something that like went home to people and something that made them think. And like you don't know whether he's right or wrong. You just don't get it. And that's the whole point. It's about making you think about something in a different way. But he took on like a particular type of responsibility in that work, and it was responsibility to convey something new, to make people think things about a situation in a way that they've never thought those things before. And that actually, yeah, that kind of actually might be offensive to some people. And if it is offensive, I think you should take responsibility for that offense or whatever, and say I didn't want to make it offensive. But I think that even if it was to some people offensive, because some things just are to some people offensive, and that's like not a nice thing, that acknowledging that you have something to say about this issue that makes people think about it on a deeper level, like it's sometimes worth that or whatever. I think another example is like Medea, which is like by the Greek playwright Euripides, which is like about a mother killing her two innocent children, because her husband cheated on her, right? Like that sounds like something which is horrific. Right? What it is really is like an exploration of the patriarchal values that she has been like oppressed underneath, and how this towards the end of the play actually seems to be the correct response to that. Like how you're like, wait a sec, like maybe I think differently about that. That's about entering the mind of a criminal, and it's about making us think differently about that criminal. That is a responsibility, like in that play, that artist took that responsibility upon themselves to make you think differently about people. And sometimes it is horrifying. Like I'm reading another play by Aeschylus, the Oresteia, where there's these horrible creatures called the Furies who like have their mouths are covered in ulcers and their eyes are made of ulcers, and they have like all these horrible like puking up people and stuff like that. Like that gave me nightmares. That wasn't a nice experience. I was hurt by that. But I think that there's there was a broader responsibility at play there, and there's a responsibility of a discussion of social issues, like in a way that hasn't been done before, of the like makeup of of masculine and feminine like interplaying in each other. So I think that there is like a difference between offending someone and having a responsibility. I don't think those things are too mutually exclusive, but I think that acknowledging that an artist shouldn't acknowledge their power, like it is probably wrong.
Thanks very much. and thank you to all the speakers in the debate tonight. And I invite everyone to give every speaker one last round of applause. So now we can put the motion to the floor. So all those in favour of the motion that this House believes the artist has no responsibilities, say aye. Aye. And all those opposed, say nay. Nay. Okay, so I'd say the motion falls. Sarah Martel, the real president, will make some
Okay, guys, so I won't keep it very long, just a very few short announcements. Firstly, I'd like people to join with me and give our registrar, Keith Ryder, a massive round of applause for tonight's debate. Mr. President, Keith Ryder, all over the minutes. Secondly, just onto the SEC business. So we have the Student Economic Review debate next week, where three of Trinity's finest debaters, including our very own VP, Ms. Hannah Beresford, the other societies, Mr. William Dunn, and nobody's societies, Mr. Noel Casey, and the team from Yale, on the motion that this House believes that the US should open the Mexican border. And in the chair will be Gideon Rachman, the Chief Foreign Affairs Commentator for the Financial Times since 2006. So then on to Team DC's business. So for all of our wonderful freshies, we have our National Maidens Trials next Tuesday and Wednesday. This is a day-long event, and we hope that you drop into at least 2 debates during the day to be eligible to go to the National Maidens Debate Competition. And finally, we are bringing Mahafis back in a one-day tournament for graduate teams on the Thursday of Reading Week. So that's starting with the 26th of February, so keep that one free. So without further ado, I would like to invite you all next door to our very, very generous reception, and we hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you very much.
No, my mom's watching. 5 whole viewers. Hey.
Here. Oh no, one just left as you said, mommy.